Hey, I'm Christina from 25 and Pine, and this is the tutorial video on how to use this template to make our Martha table with either the rectangle legs or with the dowel legs. To make the dowels, you're going to cut out the circle portion of the template, and to make the rectangle legs, you'll cut out the rectangles.
For the table we're going to be making today, I'm using a 1x8 piece of pine that I bought at a home improvement store, but the most exciting part about a template is that you can use whatever type of wood that you want, and you can stain it and make it whatever color you want. So I use my template to size out my piece of wood that I need. I make it a little bit bigger than the template to minimize our waste. Now that your wood is cut, you'll use the acrylic template to cut out the holes for either rectangle legs or dowels. For the dowel legs, I bought a 1-inch round poplar dowel and use that for the legs, but today we're going to cut out some rectangle legs on the table saw. To attach the template to the piece of wood, I use double-sided tape. You can also use hot glue, but I prefer the tape. Cut 2 strips and attach it to the back of the template, and then peel off the backing and press it onto your piece of wood. Make sure it's on there very securely. You don't want this slipping in the process of routering. Choose your pieces of wood based on, you'll do the underside of the top piece and you'll do the top side of the bottom piece, so pick which faces of the wood you want to be showing where, and then using a template bit on your router, you will follow the acrylic template around. Make sure the bearing on your router bit is touching the acrylic template and that it can cut smoothly through the piece of wood, but that it's not low enough that it's going to cut into your table or your sanding mat that I use. I have this one linked in our Amazon storefront if you want a sanding mat. It just helps prevent slipping, and I find that it helps while I'm routering. For the acrylic templates, any router will work. You can use a hand router, you can use a corded hand router, or you can use a router table. I prefer this one just because it's easier to manage with the battery, and it also has the dust attachment, which I have attached to a vacuum. Using your router, you'll carefully move around the template. The template acts as a guide for the piece of wood, so it'll replicate underneath what the template is telling it to do. You'll router out the entire outside of the circle, and then you'll move into the smaller bits for the joinery. To do this, you will hold on to the router to make sure it doesn't slip, lean one piece on the back piece of the wood, and then slowly plunge the router into the wood. Then once your router is comfortably in the piece of wood, then you can move it around to the outskirts of the template, and then it'll cut out your shape that you need for your legs. When you're moving around with your router, make sure you're turning it on and off in the process. So I'll turn it on right before I plunge into it, and I will turn it off before I pull it out. Here's a little bit of a closer up view so that you can actually see what I'm doing, and just slowly moving the router around inside of the acrylic template. Turn it off, and then repeat the process on all 4 leg holes, and then on both the top and the bottom pieces. Make sure that before you take the template off of the piece of wood to move on to the next piece, that you double check that all of your parts are carved out perfectly. It is a lot harder to do once you take the acrylic template off. Once you're finished routering out all the parts, you can use a putty scraper or something to help pop off the template. Once the template is popped off, and depending on the thickness of your wood, I use a flush trim bit and go around the opposite side so that the bearing is tracing the top of the piece of the wood that we had already carved with the template router. Next, we're going to move on to making the legs. I used a table saw for this, and I measured the inside part of the leg and then made my leg that size, and then eventually we'll sand it to make sure it fits properly. This part, if you're going to do the dowels, you just have to sand a little bit of the edges of the dowels to make sure it fits in the hole. If you don't have a table saw, you can use a circular saw, or even just buy the piece of wood already at your right dimension from your home improvement store. Then again, depending on your type of wood, you're going to want to hit that with an orbital sander, or you can hand sand it. It'll just take a little bit longer. We'll also go and do a final sand once it's all assembled, but this is just to get the legs to fit in properly, and I will round the corners of the legs to make sure they fit in the pocket of the hole that the router left. As you're sanding, make sure you're continuously dry fitting, because a little bit sanding off of them in the wrong direction is going to make the leg not fit, and then you'll have to start all over. So once everything is sanded, we'll move on to assembly. Using the other piece of your template kit, this marks the center of your hole, so you're going to know where to put the dowels after. You can also do this once you assemble the legs, but I like to do it before so I can pre-drill a little hole through the top, and then later when I'm going back and adding my Miller dowels, it's easier to find it center on versus putting the template on top and then putting the little thing in the hole. This is just the easiest way to go about it, but there are other ways that you can use it. Once you pre-drill every hole for the dowel, we'll add a little bit of glue. Don't add too much or you'll have to clean it up once you assemble it, and if anything squeezes out, because that'll affect your staining. I add a little bit of glue to each hole, and then I will plug in the legs gently and use a hammer to hammer them in. Depending on your type of wood, you'll want to be careful during assembly, because if your legs are too tight, it can cause the wood to split, crack, and it'll just totally mess up your project. So once you have all 4 legs in the appropriate holes, I'll pop the top onto the tabletop and then gently hammer that into place. You'll just have to adjust as needed to get the legs to go into the top holes and match up and line up with the bottom. And then gently hammer the top onto the legs. Doing this on the floor is actually easier. I don't know why I didn't do it here. And then we're going to move on to drilling for Miller dowels. Since we already pre-drilled for the holes, we know exactly where our Miller dowels are going to go. So carefully using your Miller dowel kit, drill holes into the legs where you had marked. You go to the little line on the bit and it tells you exactly where to go. You'll knock out the dust from the hole. You can always re-drill it if there's still dust in the hole. And then you glue up your Miller dowel, plug it into place, and gently hammer it in. You'll want the glue to set a little bit before you add the Miller dowels, and then also the glue needs to set once the Miller dowels are in place. Once they are in place and the glue is dried, you can use an oscillating tool or a pull saw to cut off the tops of the Miller dowels because they won't fully plug in. To finish your table, you can use an orbital sander to sand it smooth, and then apply whatever stain and finish you'd like. Thanks for buying our template. Hope you enjoyed this build.